Welcome back, everybody. This is Days of Noah number 56, and there's a man by the name of George Orwell who wrote a book called 1984. It's a very prophetic book about how the world was going to become this dystopian society towards the end of the century, and he was very accurate in many of his predictions. One of the things he said is, "He who controls the past controls the future, and he who controls the present controls the past." One of the things that I've found during my time in prayer and study and research is that history has been rewritten, that what we think we know, we don't actually know. We've been given the modified cliff notes of the past, and the cliff notes have been distorted to meet the narrative that the powers that be would have us to believe. And so those who control the information, those who control the dissemination of information, the media, the industrial military complex, the New World Order, whatever you want to call them, they've been controlling the narrative for decades, and as a consequence, they've been able to keep us in the dark about what truth really is and what reality really is. And I think today's lecture will probably challenge some of your thoughts about World War II, who was running the show, and what was some of the different factors that led to the ideology of Adolf Hitler. So we're going to take a close look at the Roman Catholic Church, but in particular, the Jesuit Priesthood. The Jesuit Priesthood is basically the military arm of the Roman Catholic Church, and it's a secretive organization, so you can sort of think of it like a secret society within the church. It was really started as a consequence of the Protestant Reformation by Martin Luther in 1517. The Catholics had controlled all of Europe from 300 AD for another 1600 years until we were coming into the Renaissance. And finally, some of the Protestants were able to break the chains and be liberated from that system. And as a consequence, the Catholics did not like that, and so they decided to create what was referred to as the Society for Jesus. Now, don't let the name fool you. In my opinion, they are not serving Jesus Christ. They're just hiding underneath that name. But one of the purposes of the Jesuit priesthood, the Society of Jesus, was to infiltrate the Protestant Reformation, to begin sowing seeds of discourse, to try and splinter that aspect of the church and seek and destroy in whatever way possible. And we're going to take a closer look at their oaths in a minute. Now, interestingly, these Jesuits are trained in astrobiology and cosmology. They're very aware of ufology. Why, I'm not sure. Why that they're getting trained in these things, because that has not a lot to do with the Catholic religion. But as we're going to see, the Jesuits are behind the idea of the New Age movement and some of the extraterrestrial movement that's being precipitated now. And we're going to take a look at that in the next lecture. The other important thing to understand is that for the first time in world history, we have a Jesuit Pope. Now, these Jesuits have always been the secret military arm of the church. They were never meant to be the religious leaders. But 500 years later, we have our first secret military arm of the church is now the spiritual leader. The Jesuit Pope is running the Vatican. And then lastly, we're going to look at some of the connections between the Jesuits and the Nazis. And we're also going to take a look at Darwin's theory of evolution and how that affected the development of Adolf Hitler. Now, before we move on, I like to look at symbols. Over here is a symbol of the Society of Jesus. Notice it's a black sun, and it's very similar to some of the other black suns that we've seen. The black sun represents Saturn. The Nazis have been worshiping Saturn for decades, and we see the black sun in many different occult circles dating all the way back to Egyptology, Babylon, Rome, etc. So one of the things that we see with this secret military arm of the Catholic Church known as the Jesuit Priesthood is that they are operating under what's referred to as the Black Pope, or the sovereign general, the master general commander of the Vatican City and the Roman Catholic Church. And the Black Pope is really supposedly the one who's running the show, and the white Pope that we see on television is more of a figurehead. Now, all of these Jesuits who've been brought into this system, they have to take an oath. They have to get down on their hands and knees before the Black Pope, take a crucifix with a dagger fixed in the end of it, place it against their heart, and they make an oath to the Black Pope, swearing their allegiance, saying things along these lines: that I declare that I will, when opportunity presents, make and wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants, and liberals, as I am directed to do, to exterminate them from the face of the whole earth, that I will spare neither age, sex, or condition. That means babies, women, whatever, and that I'll hang, waste, and boil, flay, strangle, and bury alive these infamous heretics. In other words, they'll kill you in any way, fashion. Nothing's off the table. We'll rip up the stomachs and the wombs of their women, and we'll crush their infants' heads against the walls in order to annihilate forever their execrable race. That when the same cannot be done openly, I will secretly use the poison cup, the strangulating cord, the steel of the poniard, or the leaden bullet. See, they're saying that we'll do it in secret, we'll poison you, however we have to assassinate you, it doesn't matter. Regardless of your honor, of your rank, of your dignity, or your authority, it can be a high-ranking official, it can be a religious person, it doesn't matter. Whatever their condition in life, public or private, as time is directed to do so by an agent of the Pope or superior of the Brotherhood of the Holy Faith of the Society of Jesus. And so as you can see, these guys mean business. They have taken a sworn oath to do whatever necessary to infiltrate their enemies and destroy them. So if you go back in history and you look at some of the famous writings that many people have taken a lot of time and energy to produce, they've done lots of research, we find that the Jesuits have been behind a lot of the wars. This guy, Charles Chineke, he wrote a book called 50 Years in the Church of Rome. This is what he said on page 174. The Jesuits are a military organization, not a religious order. Their chief is the general of an army, not just the mere father of a monastery. And the aim of this organization is power. Power in the most despotic exercise. Absolute power, universal power, power to control the world by the volition of a single man. He goes on to say that Jesuitism kind of reminds me of Phariseeism. Jesuitism is the most absolute of despotisms and dictatorships, and at the same time, the greatest and the most enormous of abuses. The general of the Jesuits, that is the Black Pope, he insists on being master, sovereign over the sovereign. Wherever the Jesuits are admitted, they will be masters, cost whatever it may. Their society is by nature dictatorial, and therefore it is the irreconcilable enemy of all constituted authority. Notice what he says here. Every act, every crime, however atrocious, is a meritorious work if committed for the interest of the society of the Jesuits or by the order of its general. Does this sound like the New World Order to you? An organization based on power, that's despotic, absolute power, universal power, and power to control the world through dictatorship, I would say that that's exactly who the New World Order sound like. And actually, these Jesuits date back centuries. They were involved in the Napoleonic Wars. They helped institute World War I, World War II. We have men like Adam Weishaupt, who's become sort of an infamous German Babylonian Talmudic Jew who started the German Bavarian Illuminati, which is a secret society founded in Germany, dating all the way back to 1776. I realize the Illuminati has become a catchphrase and a buzzword, but there was a real organization that goes back many, many centuries, written by Adam Weishaupt, in German, Das Illuminatum. And of course, we see a picture of a book on the front with an owl. Usually owls represent Baal and Moloch. But when you do research on Adam Weishaupt, first of all, he was not a Torah-worshiping Jew that would derive from the Hebrews and Judea from the Bible. But rather, he is a Babylonian Talmudic Jew, and therefore he's into the Babylonian Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism. He and many of his comrades, including men like Amschel Bauer, who was another Babylonian Talmudic Jew, would later have his name changed to Mayer Rothschild. And so Rothschild would become the big banking dynasty that would start the Bank of England in the 1700s. All of these guys were Jesuit trained. They went to Jesuit schools, and then they started dabbling in the Babylonian Talmud, and that's how they got into the occult. And so they've been running the secret societies in the New World Order ever since. See, if you go back throughout the world wars, you'll see the fingerprint of the Catholic Church and the Jesuits everywhere. For example, there's a famous French historian by the name of Edmond Paris who wrote this book in the 1960s after World War II that we see here on the right called The Secret History of the Jesuits. And in that book, he documented that the Führer, that is Adolf Hitler, had come to power thanks to the votes of the Catholic Zentrum. The Catholic Zentrum was basically the center party, the political party, that was overseen by Jesuit-trained Ludwig Haas, who was a German preacher. Only 5 years before, in 1933, but most of the objectives cynically revealed in Mein Kampf were already realized, for this book was written by the Jesuit-controlled Father Bernhard Stempfli and later signed by Hitler. He goes on to say that, for it was the Society of Jesus, that is the Jesuits, which perfected the famous pan-German program is laid out in this book, and then the Führer endorsed it. So a couple things there. Number one, and we're going to take a look at this famous meeting in a minute called the Concordat Reich. But as we'll see, this guy Ludwig Haas, this Jesuit priest, he was a very powerful man in Germany during this era. Not only did he help solidify all the votes so that Hitler could be brought into power, but he also helped broker the deal between the Roman Catholic Church and the Nazis, as we'll look at in a moment. And as Edmond Paris claimed, there's a lot of evidence to reveal that this guy actually wrote the book Mein Kampf. That book, which means My Struggle, was supposedly written by Hitler when he was in prison. And he was already being groomed at that point to become the Vice Chancellor of Germany. And so the Jesuit-trained Bernhard Stempfli wrote the book. They had Hitler endorse it and sign it. And then that book was disseminated amongst the German people to start laying down the foundation for German National Socialism and German pride for the future war that was upon the world at that time. So that's how these Jesuits work. There's a lot of subliminal messaging, a lot of predictive programming, a lot of mind control, a lot of propaganda, and so they begin working well in advance. And what you begin to see is that men like Hitler have been chosen, they've been groomed, essentially they're puppets. They do have a lot of power, but there's always a shadow group in the unseen realm who are the ones who are really controlling it. Now we got to understand that the Catholic power, the church, it recognized the direction that Germany was headed. I mean, we just came out of World War I, where Germany was defeated. There were severe reparations put on Germany, and over time things were manifesting that looked like it was going to lead to World War II. And so the Catholics, the church and the state had to come together. And so they began propping up Nazi Germany. And we have men like John Cornwell, who's done a great job of describing the Catholic Church during the rise of Hitler. He wrote the book called Hitler's Pope, The Secret History of Pope Pius XII. And in this book, he chronicles the life of the man named Eugenio Pacelli. Now, Pacelli, we see an image of him right here. Pacelli is the Italian Catholic Jesuit priest, or excuse me, not Jesuit, but Catholic priest, who would later become Pope Pius XII. And he was arguably one of the most dangerous and powerful Catholic churchmen in modern history. When he became the pontiff during World War II, not only did he fail to speak out against Hitler's final solution, but he personally made the final solution possible. And for those of you that don't know what the final solution is, the final solution was when Hitler decided that they were going to try and eradicate the Jewish race. And so we see, if you go back in time, this Pacelli was a very prominent man even back in the 1920s. He was a powerful lawyer that worked in Munich and Berlin, and he helped shape and develop unprecedented power in Rome and in Vatican City. And so it wasn't a surprise that he would eventually rise to the point of becoming the Pope. Now, in 1933, we're talking at least 5 years before the war, we're already seeing treaties being made between the Catholic Church and the Nazi Party. The most famous one is called the Reich Concordat. And this is an image of it down here. And this is where we see the Vice Chancellor of Germany signing treaties with the future Pope in order to solidify the power between the church and the state. Of course, history doesn't teach us that. We have to learn that on our own. And so, as we see here, 6 years later, on March 2nd, 1939, Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli was sworn in as Pope Pius XII, and he had a meeting with Hitler. And then 4 days later, Hitler's tanks started rolling into Poland, and World War II was officially started. We also notice at the beginning of the war that Pope Pacelli wrote a letter to Hitler saying, "To the illustrious Herr Adolph Hitler." Notice the adjectives he uses here. The illustrious Adolf Hitler, Führer and Chancellor of the German Reich. Here at the beginning of our pontificate, we wish to assure you that we remain devoted to the spiritual welfare of the German people. See there? Basically what's happening here is the Pope saying, hey, since you're the Führer and the Chancellor of Germany, you're the most powerful man basically in Europe at this point in time, we're letting you know that we are devoted to the spiritual welfare of the German people. Not the Italian people, not the Austrian people, not the English people, but the German people. And notice also it's the spiritual welfare. Why is the Roman Catholic Church, which by the way means the universal Church of Christ, why is it devoted to the spiritual welfare of only the German people? During the many years we spent in Germany, we did all in our power to establish harmonious relations between church and state. Now that the responsibilities of our pastoral function have increased, how much more ardently do we pray to reach that goal? May the prosperity of the German people and their progress in every domain come, with God's help, to fruition. This is literally days before Hitler began marching across Europe with intention on destroying everything that he came across. And so we see quotes like Adolf Hitler saying, "Today I believe that I'm acting in accordance with the will of the Almighty Creator." See, he had the church behind him. He had the Pope and the cardinals and the bishops and all of the clergy behind him. And so he felt that he was doing God's will. And we see this in John 16, where Jesus says, "These things I've spoken to you, that you should not be made to stumble, for they will put you out of the synagogue. Yes, the time is coming that whoever kills you will think that he offers God's service." See, history is full of people who went out and murdered other human beings in the name of God. Even though one of our first major commandments is, "Thou shalt not kill." That's one of the main commandments, part of the 10 Commandments. And yet men find the audacity to go out in the name of God, in the name of their religion, and murder people. And there are probably none that are more famous for doing that than the Catholic Church. Over the course of 1,500 years, we have many testimonial accounts of them doing everything from burning women at the stake who were so-called witches to the Spanish Inquisition, where, thousands of people were also murdered. And so now it's Adolf Hitler's turn. Him and his occult ideology are now prepared to go across Europe and murder millions of people and throw their bodies in incinerators. And he believes that he's actually doing it in the name of God. And my response to that would be that Satan is the god of this world, and that was the god that Adolf Hitler was serving, not the God of the Bible. So this was really the Catholic Jesuit priesthood are the ones who propped up the Nazis. The Nazi SS was a paramilitary unit run by Heinrich Himmler. Many people believe that Himmler was actually the one in charge of Adolf Hitler. Heinrich Himmler was a Jesuit-trained man, and he was the one who was directly responsible for the final solution of the Jews, and he's the one who ran the Nazi SS. The SS in German is Schutzstaffel. That means the protection squadron, but actually it has a lot of deep occult history to it. When you look at the Nazi SS, you actually see something more along the lines of this. The SS is really stylized as the Armenian Germanic ruins. Germanic ruins is an ancient Germanic language that goes back many centuries and millennia ago. One of the people who brought this back into popularity is this occultist right here by the name of Guido von List. He was an Austrian occultist. He practiced Wotanism and Odinism, where he worshipped all of the ancient Germanic Norse gods such as Wotan, Odin, Thor, Loki, etc. And when you study out Norse mythology, you find that many of those Norse gods are depicted in a very similar fashion as Greek and Roman mythology. They also have demigods within that belief system. And so I believe that all of this mythology is really in relation to the angels and the Nephilim and the divine bloodlines of the Nephilim kings that existed before the flood. And so there's some truth to some of this ancient mythology. But Guido von List claimed that the Germanic runic language, which dates back thousands of years, actually derived from an ancient Aryan priest kings. And this is actually connected to the religion of Theosophy. This is what the 18th century occultist Madame Blavatsky propagated through the religion of Theosophy in Russia. She talked about the 6 root races, and she helped birth the New Age movement, and she talked about the ancient Aryan god kings that used to exist on the planet. And so again, this is all references to the Nephilim of Genesis 6. But when you look at this symbol, the Nazi SS, this is an image of the Nazi SS patch that goes on the shoulders. As you can see, those are not S's. Those are lightning bolts, and they come from this right here. If you look at the ancient runic Germanic language, which is kind of a counterfeit to the Hebrew language, notice here that you see the S, the sig or the soul that stands for sun, is this right here. It's a lightning bolt. And so that's really what we're looking at. We're looking at ancient Germanic runic language. And when you study that symbol, it has to do with the ancient Teutonic Knights. The Teutonic Knights were the Knights Templar and all of the Catholic Masonic Rosicrucian order of the Knights that go back into the Dark Ages, over 1,000 years ago. And so the true translation of the Nazi SS most perfectly is the meaning, the Knights of the Holy See. That's who the Nazi SS are. They are a modern version of the Germanic Knights of the Roman Catholic Church. So we have many famous quotes from Hitler. One was, "I learned much from the order of the Jesuits. Until now, there's never been anything more grandiose on earth than the hierarchical organization of the Roman Catholic Church." Now, there are a lot of people who suffer from cognitive dissonance. They deny that the Roman Catholic Church was deeply embedded with the Nazi movement. But there is so much research and people who've written on this subject. These are all images of Adolf Hitler at different rallies, German rallies with soldiers. Here we see it's being represented by the cardinals. Again, here is Hitler meeting up with a different cardinal. All of these are different images. This is not the same image from different angles. These are all different images of different German rallies over the course of World War II. Again, you see Nazi SS soldiers standing beside high-level Roman Catholic bishops and cardinals and priests, all who are making the sign Sieg Heil, where you put your right hand up to worship the Führer. Here was a famous book written by Nazi SS soldier Hermann Rauschning, and this is what he said: "I transferred much of this organization, in reference to the Jesuit Catholic priests, into my own party. I'm going to let you in on a secret. I am founding an order. In my burghs of the order, we will raise up a youth which will make the world tremble." He was responsible for helping develop the brown shirts and to help build up the SS of the Nazi regime. And so the Nazi regime and the Nazi SS soldiers were developed based on the organization of the Jesuits, a secret Masonic order. And we'll look at that more in a moment. But again, you'll see many imagery with the leaders of Nazi Germany always walking around with the German popes and the German Jesuit priests. And Heinrich Himmler himself was a Jesuit trained man. That's why Adolf Hitler later said that I can see Himmler as our own Ignatius of Loyola. What's he referring to there? Well, Ignatius of Loyola was the man who started the Jesuit priesthood in 1530s. And since Himmler was a Jesuit trained man, Hitler's basically saying that we've got our own version of Ignatius of Loyola with us in the Nazi regime, known as Heinrich Himmler. Now, to prove that the Nazi SS were really the Knights of the Holy See, let's take a look at some more knights within the Catholic Church. We have what's referred to as the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, also known today as the Knights of Malta. Notice that they're knights. They're wearing robes, they carry swords, and they knight each other just like they did in the Knights Templar going back 1,000 years. They are a Catholic religious order started in 1530. That was just 10 or 15 years after the Jesuit Priesthood. Or excuse me, the Jesuit Priesthood started in 1534. So basically, the Knights of Malta is a Masonic Rosicrucian secret society based on the Jesuit priesthood within the Roman Catholic Church. And to just connect the dots with the German Nazi war machine, if you look at these Knights of Malta, you'll notice several things about them. Number one, they have the Maltese Iron Cross. Also, you'll notice their color scheme, red, white, and black. Here we see an image where the Knights of Malta have ordained high-profile noble knights during the 4th awards. We see the Grand Master. This is exactly what happens when you see a Masonic ceremony take place. A Grand Master proceeds forward with the ordination of the priesthood. But just take a look at the comparison here. Here you see a symbolic Nazi iron Maltese cross. The Nazis used to wear iron crosses, which are also referred to as Maltese crosses. Where does that come from? It comes from the Knights of Malta, a Catholic religious order. And then down here you can also see another variation of a Maltese cross with swastikas. This is the exact same image that you see on his chest right here. So make no mistake, the Knights of Malta, which is a Catholic institution, is also a Nazi institution. Even Albert Mackey himself, one of the world's most famous 33rd degree Freemasons, in his book Encyclopedia of Freemasonry in 1925 states that the Knights of Malta and the Knights Templar are a Rosicrucian upper degree of Freemasonry. Here's his book right here. Notice that it has the compass and the square inside of a circle that makes a 6-pointed star. Also, we see an image of a pyramid. We see the double-headed phoenix. It has all the classic esoteric symbolism. And so Albert Mackey has confirmed that this Catholic religious order of the Knights of Malta are nothing more than high-level Freemasons and Rosicrucians. That's why when you see their institutions, you see the classic symbolism like the checkered floor, which we see in all Masonic fraternities. Also, Masons wear Masonic aprons. Well, so do the Knights of Malta. This is one of the Masonic aprons right here. Notice the pyramid with the skull and bones in the center, which stands for the Skull and Bones Society, which we'll take a look at in a moment. But you can see that as they go through the upper ranks, they receive the New York Rite Masonic Jewel Order of the Red Cross, the Masonic Order of the Knights of Malta. And so this is just a New York Masonic Rite and Scottish Rite upper level secret society that's part of the Roman Catholic Church. And unfortunately, they've taken over the Red Cross, because the Red Cross, if you study them out closely during World War II, were also partially responsible for everything that transpired in World War II. And so you'd say, well, wait a sec, I thought that red cross was in reference to Jesus Christ. No, the red cross is in reference to Rosicrucianisms. When you study Rosicrucian, the rose is a red rose inside of a cross. It's a secret society built on Masonic principles. So on the previous slide, we discussed the Masonic apron of the Knights of Malta, the Catholic Masonic order. You notice the skull and bones. We see this on most Masonic symbolism. Here we have the royal arch with the checkered floor, and always at the bottom of the royal arch, we see the casket with the bones and the crossbones, the skull and crossbones on the front of it. This represents one of the secret societies of Yale, one of the most prestigious Ivy League schools in the world, known as the Skull and Bones Society, where many famous members such as George Bush Jr., previous President of the United States, also Secretary of State John Kerry, and many others participated in this secret society. This is also known as the Order of 322 or the Brotherhood of Death. That's the other name of the Skull and Bones Society. These members are referred to as bonesmen, and they have to do some pretty extreme initiations to become part of the society. And so here's an image of the bonesmen back in Yale in the early 1900s. These are all the prestigious white men who went to this school, who participated in the secret society, became part of the Masonic Rosicrucian religion, and then as they leave into the world, they're all deeply connected with the powerful elites of the world, and they become all of the future leaders of the world. We have, if you study it, guys like Robert Lovett, who became the U.S. Secretary of Defense in the 1950s. You have governors of Massachusetts like William Washburn, also Henry Luce, the founder and publisher of Time Magazine and Sports Illustrated. Henry Stimson, who was one of the U.S. Secretaries of War. Also, James Angleton, who helped start the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. Multiple Supreme Court justices, Morrison Waite, Potter Stewart. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Powerful founders of Fortune 500 companies, powerful lobbyists, lawyers, presidents. Back then, those who ran the New York Central Railroad system were all part of this secret society. Howard Taft was involved with this secret society. So, make no mistake, they're all connected. They all know each other. They all rub elbows together. They all go to these secret little cocktail parties, after hours, and participate in occult rituals and talk about how they're going to run the planet. And they were involved in World War II. And the Bushes were one of the primary Nazi sympathizers who funded them during the war. See, as you continue to investigate, you find that your religious leaders like the popes, your military leaders like Mussolini and Hitler, and many of the European royal bloodlines like the Queen, that they are all interconnected. They're all part of the Knights of Malta Masonic Society, just as we see the royal family down here wearing all of the Masonic regalia. And so it becomes apparent that this is not a master conspiracy. This is a fact. All the world leaders, they're on a whole nother level. They're running together in the same circles, and they are the ones who are leading us to the New World Order system and the beast system and the mark of the beast. They're the ones responsible. They're the ones that have bought up all the media. They're the ones that control the flow of information. They're the ones that pass all the laws. They control the currencies, and they basically run the planet. And there's much more evidence that the Vatican was instrumental in assisting over 3,000 Nazi leaders to escape the Nuremberg trials, where the Vatican hierarchy issued fake passports. This is called the rat lines, and they led all these Nazi leaders into South America, in particular Argentina, Brazil, and places like that. And there have been many people who have documented this. But, there was the Nuremberg trials after World War II, where these Germans were supposed to be penalized for crimes against humanity. As we'll see in a moment, only a very select few scapegoats were chosen to go down with the ship, while all of the rest of the Nazi leaders were able to escape. Many of them went over to the Soviet Union. A bunch of them went into different places in Europe, but the majority of them moved into South America, and then there was an entire group of them that moved into the United States. Here we see the Red Cross and the Vatican helped thousands of Nazis escape. Research shows how travel documents ended up in the hands of the likes of Adolph Eichmann and Joseph Mengele in the post-war chaos. If you recall, Joseph Mengele, also known as the Angel of Death, was the demonized, satanic Nazi SS doctor who used to sit outside of the death camps waiting for all of the trains to bring in the millions of Jews, and he would find the young twin male and female Jewish boys and girls, and he would take them into the Nazi death camps and do horrifying DNA and genetic experimenting on them. And he was the one responsible for coining the term twinning, which would later lead to the formation of genetics and eugenics and cloning. And as we're going to see, all of the leaders of the United States were involved. President Eisenhower and Truman, they knew about it. Dulles, who was in the CIA, as we're going to see, these Nazi leaders would end up going into NASA and starting NASA. The OSS would turn into the CIA. They started all of the big pharma corporations. They started the MK Ultra mind control programs that Mengele had perfected in World War II by doing trauma-based mind control and creating multiple personality disorder and dissociative identity disorder. That's all the Nazis that were able to escape World War II and continue on as the Fourth Reich, who are now the New World Order that are leading us to the beast system today. Here's a newspaper article from Nazi Angel of Death Joseph Mengele created a twin town in Brazil. The Nazi doctor Joseph Mengele is responsible for the astonishing number of twins in a small Brazilian town, claims an Argentine historian. 1 in 5 pregnancies in this town have resulted in twins, most of them blonde-haired and blue-eyed. And so what we find is that the Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican issued out fake passports, and they gave all of these men, they granted them asylum, they moved them all around the planet, but in particular they took the Nazi scientists and the doctors and they moved them into Brazil and Argentina. They continued to fund them with their eugenics program because they were trying to perfect and create the Aryan man, which is as the great German philosopher referred to it, the Übermensch, the Superman, a genetically altered, hybridized Superman, which was really based on this concept of the Nephilim. It's not a coincidence that Adolf Hitler had archaeological teams going all around the planet, including Egypt and the Himalayas, trying to dig up ancient giant bones, while Mengele was meanwhile trying to master DNA so that they could genetically reverse engineer and recreate the Nephilim. That's what the whole point of making the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan man really is just a new age ideology of trying to go back to the pre-flood era of the days of Atlantis, where they could make the pre-flood divine Nephilim god kings from how the angels made it with humans. And so in this entire city, Mengele and his Nazi doctors did so much genetic manipulation on these people that they have tons of twin boys and girls in this city. You can see all of them. Twins, twins, twins. And this would become the beginning of the idea of cloning. And, after World War II, this concept of eugenics took on a really negative connotation. So all they had to do is just shift that word to genetics. And they just continued on with the same research. And there are movies made about this in the 1960s and 70s. Here's one called The Boys from Brazil. And it's the idea that the Nazis have moved into Brazil to do genetic manipulation. See, the more that you look, the deeper the rabbit hole goes, because you begin to realize that all these guys they're buddies. For example, one of the #1 international bestsellers on the far right, written by Mark Ahrens and John Loftus, they describe the Vatican, the Nazis, and the Swiss banks. What do we see there? Religion, power, and money. The unholy trinity. And notice who's in the images. We've got the Pope, Pope Pius XII, Adolf Hitler, and Joseph Stalin. Now, what history would make you believe is that Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler were enemies, and Hitler went in to destroy Russia, and he did. But him and Stalin weren't enemies. All of these world leaders, they come together in advance. They go to their Bilderberg meetings. They go to their different secret societies. They sit around and they discuss what they want to do this year, what wars they want to have, what direction they want to go. They're the ones who birthed communism. What do you want to do with oil this year? How do you want to affect the global economy? How do you want to affect the stock market? I mean, they just carve up the planet like a bunch of chess pieces, and then they begin to put on the world's greatest play act. It's just a big soap opera, and we are all the viewers who watch it. And of course, we get sucked into it because we're ignorant. We don't know how the inner workings of it all is. And we buy the narrative, and we are used as the pawns on the chess game. And pawns are indisposable. These guys have no problem killing 6 million Jews and gypsies. Stalin killed millions of his own people. They don't care. They have no qualm with that at all. And so, make no mistake, the Vatican, all of them are connected. The Nazis, it's all one big satanic system. They're the ones who are running the rat lines, even after they got caught. Even after Nazi Germany was decided that it needed to fall, they had contingency plans and backup plans. The power structure still let them go. They didn't have to face the trials. They were able to escape, and they got to go have big, fat, 6-figure pension positions for high-ranking government programs in Soviet Union and America and South America, etc. And so this is ultimately what it is. The Vatican, the Nazis, and the New World Order. This book is over 50 years old, and even back then they recognized that that's what it is. The New World Order has been around for a long time. We're just starting to throw that catchphrase around in the last 20, 30 years, but they've been on the planet since the very beginning. And I assure you, the New World Order cabal who was running America was part of the scheme as well. We know for a fact that George Herbert Walker's dad, Prescott Bush, who is photographed here with Adolf Hitler, was a huge Nazi sympathizer. He and Wall Street, all of the big banks, the J.P. Morgans, etc., were all responsible for helping bring Hitler to power. They helped finance the Nazi machine. They played both sides of the war. This has been very well documented by many different people. John Loftus wrote this book up here, America's Nazi Secret. We have another book down here called The Bush Connection. The CIA was really Hitler's Fourth Reich in America. Here they're referring to the fact that during Operation Paperclip, all the Nazis were able to escape Germany, and they came to America, and they started the different organizations like NASA and the OSS and the CIA, etc., and that the Vatican was part of it, and this was common knowledge to all the elites back then. Of course, to all of us regular people, we've been told a totally different story. See, only just a few Nazis were convicted of the Nuremberg trials. The rest of them went and started all these programs in America through Operation Paperclip. Now, we've already looked at that in the last lecture with NASA, but this was the history of the secret program where Americans went over and liberated Nazi scientists and then put them in positions of power all across the planet in the United States of America, including George Herbert Walker Bush, whose daddy, Prescott Bush, was a Nazi sympathizer. And so, is it any wonder that George Herbert Walker Bush would later become the head of the CIA and then eventually the President of the United States? It's this man right here who gave the first New World Order speech on 9/11, 1990. Any person can go on YouTube and they can just type that in and watch that, and they will see that on the date of September 11th, he stood up there and talked about how the United Nations would one day gain sovereignty over the U.S. and over our Constitution, and that he was talking about a big idea, a large global world idea called the New World Order. He is the face man and the coming out party for the New World Order. Is it shocking that 11 years later to the date, on 9/11, his son would also be president during the 9/11 attacks, which was the greatest inside job false flag that's ever taken place in the history of the world? In an interview with Sarah McLennan going back to 1992, George Herbert Walker Bush said that if the American people had ever known the truth about what the Bushes have done to this nation, we would be chased down in the streets and lynched. And he's exactly right. So now that we've done a good history lesson, looked at the Catholic Church and its involvement in the formation of World War II and the Nazis, the other thing we need to look at is this concept of evolution from Charles Darwin, which really helped develop Hitler's ideology. We're also going to see that this was one of the imperatives for eventually bringing us to the extraterrestrial movement that we still have yet to get into. But we've all heard of Charles Darwin. He is a naturalist, geologist, and biologist. He claimed to be agnostic. In 1859, he demonically channeled the book The Origin of the Species. He's the one who developed the theory of evolution and natural selection and the idea of the survival of the fittest. And by the 1870s, the scientific community and much of the general public had begun to accept evolution over creationism as a fact. Now, there's no question in my mind that Satan was whispering into Darwin's ear, planting the seeds of evolution, which would one day evolve into the concept known as directed panspermia. And we'll look at that later, but that is where Dr. Francis Watson Crick, the scientist who discovered DNA in 1952, said that extraterrestrials must have put their genetic seed on the planet millions of years ago, and then through Darwin's theory of evolution, it evolved to become mankind. And now we're on the age of Aquarius, where we're getting ready to evolve higher in a more higher physical and spiritual sense to become like our extraterrestrial progenitors and our brothers and sisters from space. But I believe that the enemy was inspiring Darwin with this concept. And the proof is in the pudding. When you look at the fruit of Darwin, his studies of evolution included many experiments into the effects of crossbreeding and inbreeding animals and humans, which often resulted in weaker, more sickly descendants. Ironically, his own lineage and marriage demonstrated this, because at age 29, he married his first cousin, Emma Wedgwood, the daughter of his mother's brother. Many people wondered if Darwin's inbreeding was responsible for all the ill impact on his children's health, in which 3 of 10 died before the ages of 11. In a letter to a friend, Darwin noted his concern for his children by saying, "They are not very robust." Darwin's marriage to his cousin was not the only mixing of blood in the two lines. The Darwin-Wedgwood family had multiple instances of close family matches, and a new analysis published online May 3rd in the Journal of Bioscience shows that Darwin's concerns about his offspring's health were very valid. The analysis, led by Dr. Barra, Professor Emeritus in the Department of Evolution, Ecology, and Organismal Biology at Ohio State University, found that Darwin's kids did have a moderate level of inbreeding, and in the family's children there was a significant positive association between child mortality and inbreeding. There have been many books written about the ancestral relationship of Darwin and the Hedgewoods, and Charles Darwin himself had once said that this entire family were a wretched family that ought to be exterminated. So what's the point here? Well, he came up with this idea, this theory of evolution, and then he tried to imply that theory in his own life, and all it did is lead to death and destruction and increased child mortality and disease in his own family. That alone blows theories in his theory. And he's exactly like Sigmund Freud. And we did a lecture on Sigmund Freud in the past. Sigmund Freud was all hopped up on cocaine and was a sexual pedophile, and he wrote out all of these demonically inspired doctrines, and mankind bought it hook, line, and sinker, even though today all the scientists said that there's absolutely no credibility to it at all. And here we are hundreds of years later, and it's the same deal with this guy, Darwin. If you study the fruit of Darwinian evolution, you only see death and destruction, and I'll prove that going forward. Let's just see where the natural process of Darwin's theories would evolve to. Jesus says that every good tree bears good fruit, and every bad tree bears bad fruit, and that a good tree doesn't bear bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. So let's just take a look at the fruit of Darwin. Darwin's theory of evolution would lead to the concept of social Darwinism, which was used to refer to various ways of thinking and theories that emerged in the second half of the 19th century that tried to apply this evolutionary concept of natural selection to human beings. Darwin's evolution from 1890 to 1920 became most known in America and was the first country in the world to undertake forced sterilization programs for the purpose of Darwinian eugenics, or the notion of creating good genes. That's right, everybody. You heard it here. You heard it correctly. America. The principal targets of the American sterilization programs were the intellectually disabled, mentally ill, deaf, blind, epileptics, and people with any physical deformities. The California sterilization programs that were produced into a book was later used and quoted by Adolf Hitler in proving that large-scale sterilization programs were not only possible, but they were ethically based on American ideals. In other words, Darwin is the one who promoted the concept of good genes and eugenics and tried to breed out all of the mongrel nations, and that led to America adopting Darwinian eugenics in their social Darwinism programs, which would later turn into forced sterilization programs in California and many other states, I might add. Just in 1929 in California alone, all of these hospitals had mandatory sterilization of patients. 3,002 and 6, that's 14,000 people in 1 year, just in California alone, had forced sterilizations. So, Darwin would go on to say that at some point, at some future period, not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. See, it was his ideology that led to the American sterilization programs, which then later led to the eugenics program by Adolf Hitler. And you see, the world is so quick to label Adolf Hitler and put all this on him, and we all know that he was a psychopath. He was obviously demonized, and he was deeply into the occult. Nobody's going to deny that, but how did he get to be that way? We see that Hitler studied American eugenics laws in order to help legitimize his anti-Semitic eugenics program in Germany. So, you know, the hands of the Americans aren't guilt-free either. This is how things work. Everything has a starting point, and then it grows over time. We had guys like Darwin, who was, you know, a nut job in my opinion. He comes up with all of his theories, which can't be proven. And then the world jumps on the bandwagon and they praise him and lift him up and put him on a pedestal. And then that starts leading to the concept of trying to promote good genes and trying to exclude, you know, other genetic anomalies, if you will. And so now we have people justifying sterilizing people and killing people. And one day you wake up and you have an Adolf Hitler. He didn't just come out of a vacuum. He didn't just wake up one day and decide he's going to try and murder half the planet. There was a spirit working behind it, decades and decades and centuries in advance, preparing the people's minds to receive it. You know, these people in these photos down here weren't a bunch of crazy maniac racists who just want to go out and wipe everybody out, but they did get caught up in the spirit of the times, which is fitter families of Georgia and the eugenics buildings where you're trying to promote good genes. Well, how could they not get caught up in it? They were being told at the time that we all come from monkeys, that we don't come from God, and that Darwin's theory of evolution is survival of the fittest, so that we need to root out the weak. So yeah, lots of people got caught up into those lies and those false systems. And as a consequence, it led to great suffering and persecution. Let's look at some more fruit of Darwin's theory of evolution. It would lead to the formation of the social Darwinism that led to Planned Parenthood, where people like Bill Gates, the obvious depopulationist and eugenicist, and others like Margaret Sanger spearheaded. Margaret Sanger was a woman who had many famous quotes such as, "The most merciful thing that a large family can do to its infants is to kill it." And she would go on to say that the Slavs, the Latins, and the Hebrews, that is the Jews, are human weeds, a dead weight of human waste, and that black soldiers and Jews are a menace to her race. She would go on to say that birth control is not contraception indiscriminately and thoughtlessly practiced. It means the release and cultivation of the better racial elements of our society and the gradual suppression, elimination, and eventual extirpation of defective stock. These are the concepts that led to the Holocaust of World War II, and this is all off the fruit of Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution. It shouldn't be shocking that Hillary Clinton accepted the Margaret Sanger Award and said, "I admire Margaret Sanger enormously, her courage, her tenacity, her vision. I'm really in awe of her. There are a lot of lessons we can learn from her life." Yeah, you admire how much death and destruction that she created through Planned Parenthood. Let's not forget that there's been 80 million abortions in America alone. And all of those laws of abortions and the right to terminate these babies was birthed off the idea of social Darwinism. So you have to understand that point A is this idea of Darwin's evolution. And that took a long time for it to be solidified into the minds of the world. eventually the world accepted it. From there, once that's cemented, you can then go to point B, which is you can start justifying the eugenics program to make good genes. This is where you get the killings and the sterilizations. From there, you get radical people who take these ideologies too far, and you get the Hitlers and the Himmlers of the world who try and control the entire planet. And we're going to see that social Darwinism is eventually going to lead to the last phase in the game, which is the final version of Darwinian evolution, which is where you and I need to evolve to become our own gods, only it's going to take the extraterrestrials who started us and their DNA to help us reach that point. And it's all based on a concept of physical and spiritual evolution. And so when you look at Hitler, he was influenced by Darwin's evolution. He was influenced by the Theosophical Society of the ancient Aryan races of god kings who had the divine bloodlines. And he was influenced by American sterilization laws to justify his final solution of the Jews. He was obsessed with eugenics, and he was a deep occultist and into Eastern mysticism as well. We know that the swastika is really an ancient symbol that goes all the way back to the Aryan master race before the flood. These are the genetically modified Nephilim, fallen angel hybrids of the pre-flood world of Atlantis. And we see this symbol being played out through India, Hinduism, Buddhism. It's in the Theosophical Society. And Adolf Hitler believed that they used to commune with spirit guides and have all kinds of occult rituals to communicate with the other entities. And the other symbol that was really prominent is the black sun of Saturn, which represented this mystical energy source that was supposed to help renew and rebuild the Aryan race. So there's another interesting area that history has failed to teach us over the last 50 years, and that is that some of the Nazis joined forces with Islamic forces. That not only are we dealing with Nazis and Catholics coming together to propagate World War II, but then enter the Muslims. When Nazis heard that Muhammad Amin al-Husseini, that is the Grand Mufti, called for Arabs to kill the Jews wherever they find them, then they knew that they'd found an ally in their terrible ideology. Hitler believed that the Muslims could be manipulated into being a powerful tool for the Nazis, and so they created entire divisions of radicalized Muslims who were part of the Muslim SS Islamic extremists. And there's many people who've documented this fact. This is an entire SS division of men who were dedicated to the Nazi Germany's war efforts. And there's lots of photos of the Grand Mufti meeting with Heinrich Himmler and Adolf Hitler. And there are many images that reveal that the Muslims became close ties with the Germans. We see that the Mufti was often meeting and traveling in the midst of the German soldiers. All throughout World War II, he was attending meetings and conferences. Here's an image of him here. And he started his own Bosnian SS troops. And Adolf Hitler has gone on record as saying, the only religion I respect is Islam, and the only prophet I admire is the Prophet Muhammad. And the reason he respected them is because they were not afraid to exterminate and try to racially cleanse entire groups of people. And that ideology continues on. Saddam Hussein was born in the mid-40s after World War II. His family were part of the SS soldiers who fought in the Third Reich. And so Saddam Hussein was raised with a Nazi ideology. It's not a coincidence that he started the Ba'ath Party, and the Ba'ath Party was based on Nazi socialistic ideals. Here, the History Channel had put a documentary together about Saddam and the Third Reich, linking the Nazis, Iraq, and Saddam Hussein. And the same thing with even today, we see inside of some of the terrorist organizations today that the radicalization of some of these young people goes back to the brown shirts of the Nazis, that you have to start programming them early and teaching them all of the hatred of the Jews and different people. And so Nazism is still existing today in many different forms. To prove that the Ba'ath Party of Saddam Hussein was very similar to the Third Reich, just take a look at their symbol. You see an iron eagle, which is exactly the same symbol as the Nazi soldiers. And that, by the way, really goes back to the mythological phoenix. The iron eagle is a phoenix. And so as you can see, not everything is what it appears. They have rewritten history. They've taught us incorrectly so that they can keep us in the dark. The same power structure that was running the world back then is running the world today. It's based on secret societies. They're the ones who propped up all the communist nations. They're the ones who run the United Nations and are interested in globalism. They're the ones who run organizations like the Federal Reserve, which is the banking cabal that's running the American monetary policy. The United Nations is part of it. All of the big government programs like the Council of Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg groups, and all of them that meet every year. And it's just like this pyramid shows. At the bottom is the 99% of humanity, which is the slave labor. And at the top is the New World Order, which is made up of the Vatican, the Holy Roman Merovingian Zionist cabal. This is the Black Pope and the who are helping pave the way for the Antichrist. They're using the Roman Catholic Church to help one day bring about a one-world religion. And they're going to use political Zionism as an agenda to bring about globalism and bring about World War III. And they're trying to pretend that it's all done in the name of God and that it's a religious ideology, but really it's all a big, large, giant political ideology to deceive mankind. And today they're just using the same old tricks from the same old playbook, only because we are so ignorant in history and because they control all the media, all of history, and all of the narrative. They're able to dictate and control the direction of everything. And so on the next lecture, we're going to then take a look at the extraterrestrial and New Age connection between the Roman Catholic Church and the Nazis and the Jesuit Priesthood, and how the end game is going to be the great delusions of 2 Thessalonians 2, where God allows mankind to believe this lie. We're also going to see how Darwin's theory of evolution plays into that entire ideology, and so that'll be part 2 of this lecture. And so on that note, Godspeed, and we'll see you on the next one.